Welcome back to Anatomy Physiology 1. We're in the second part of chapter 14, and we're going to start talking about strokes. And I do find it ironic that they named it a cerebral vascular accident. Like you could prevent it if you wanted to. Most strokes happen in old people, and it's the second greatest cause of death after coronary artery disease. Once you've had your first stroke, the odds are really good that you're going to continue to have strokes, and within a year you'll probably die. There are two main causes of strokes. One of them is where a blood vessel pops in the brain, and another one is if you get a blood clot or if your blood vessel is occluded, where it fills up with lipid deposits, and then you add calcium onto that. Here's a picture of an artery that's blocked. So there's the muscular wall. And then right here, you see the plaque build up. So this should be open. This whole area right here should be open. But there it is filled in right there. And now you have a blood clot or a thrombus on top of it. So you don't have enough space for the blood to go through, and everything downstream is not going to get enough oxygen and not going to get enough food. You may have heard the word aneurysm. That's another kind of a hemorrhage where a blood vessel pops and causes death. For those of you who are going to go on and take neuroanatomy, then you'll learn things about the hindbrain, the midbrain, the reticular formation. You'll learn about which embryonic tissues the different parts of the brain develop from. The medulla oblongata, you are expected to know where that is. So if you remember the skull and you remember the big hole at the bottom called the foramen magnum, this is where the medulla oblongata begins. It extends rostrally and ends at a groove just below the pons. And it's a little bit wider than your spinal cord. Here's a picture showing the medulla oblongata. And if you see, it's continuous with the spinal cord. So this is wider, and then there's the spinal cord. This is a nice picture because it ties together some of the things that we've been doing in different chapters. So we talked about the thalamus and the hypothalamus under it. We talked about the optic chiasm, and then there's the tuberoinfundibular stalk that runs down and attaches to the pituitary. So we don't see the pituitary here, but this is the first time we've seen the stalk, the infundibulum. Then you get to the pons and the medulla oblongata. Now, one of the things people seem to always forget that there are 12 cranial nerves because they never show number 1, which is the olfactory. They always start with the optic nerve and then go on down through the 12 cranial nerves. And then you start with your spinal nerves because now you're getting into the vertebral column. Here's the spinal cord, and they've taken the bones away, so you can't see them. So this part is inside the skull. Remember the medulla oblongata is where the foramen magnum is, the hole in the skull. Here's a side view so that we can see where the pineal gland is, or pineal gland, whichever way you pronounce it. And if you remember, if you follow the corpus callosum back, that's where you're going to find the pineal gland. All the nerve fibers that go from the brain to the spinal cord and from the spinal cord up to the brain have to pass through the medulla. And then you also have a relay center for signals going over to the cerebellum. And if you remember, the cerebellum is the part of the brain that gives you balance. In neuroanatomy, you'll go over this slide in great detail. The pons has 4 of the cranial nerves attached. That would be 5, 6, 7, and 8. And they cover hearing, equilibrium, taste, and your facial sensations in your facial nerve. It has some motor rolls, so you can roll your eyes, smile, chew, swallow, pee, and make spit and tears. If you're a fan of police shows or things that have criminals in them, a lot of times you'll see an execution and they'll make the person bend over and put their head down and they'll shoot them in the brainstem. So if you do the brainstem, the person's not going to be breathing anymore. You've killed them for sure. Whereas if you shoot them in the forehead, you may just do a frontal lobotomy on them. Depends on what kind of bullet that you use. This is an interesting picture because it shows you the path where your hearing, your auditory input, comes in, goes through the midbrain. Here's your visual input. It's coming in. Everything seems to meet at the thalamus and then spread out to the parts of the brain where it needs to be processed. So there's areas in the brain that integrate all the incoming information. So instead of individual nerves firing and causing a muscle to contract, we have whole big patterns of nerves working together, neurons working together, producing rhythmic signals for the muscles, for breathing, for swallowing. So this is a very involved process. It's not just one muscle, one nerve kind of thing going on. We have integrated visual. So you've got different muscles that pull your eyes up and down, up to the left and the right. So all of these have to get together so that your eye knows what to do. We have to maintain balance, and we do this partly with the cerebellum. We do it with the cochlea, the semicircular canals. I mentioned before that the brain doesn't feel pain, but it understands pain. So you can send pain signals up into the brain, and then you can actually send a message down and block transmission of the pain signals. So there's some pain signals that you can block, and there's some that you cannot. Other interesting things that your brain can do, you can go into a coma. There was a college student named Karen Ann Quinlan, so another Karen, who mixed Quaaludes and liquor, and she went into an irreversible coma, and she stayed in the coma for the longest time. They never thought she would come out of it, and so they didn't work her muscles, and her muscles atrophied, and her bones fused, and finally they got a court order to disconnect her and let her go ahead and die. But she was alive for a very long time in a coma. So, take-home message there, don't mix liquor and especially downers, depressants, because they can throw you into a coma. And one of the things that you may have noticed is it's called habituation. But basically, you hear something, you see something, and you just, after a while, or you smell something, and you just shut it out. You don't pay any attention to it. You don't even notice it anymore. And somebody may mention, oh, the air conditioner's on. And you stop and you think about it, you go, oh, yeah, there's the hum of the air conditioner. But because you've heard it so many times and for so long, you just ignore it. So you can actually ignore repetitive or inconsequential stimuli. And one of the things that they talk about when they're talking about people with autism, they think, well, they're shutting down. Well, actually, they're thinking that instead of shutting down, they have so much stimulus coming in and they're unable to block the inconsequential, so they're literally overwhelmed with information that's incoming. Here's a cartoon from one of my most favorite cartoonists, and that would be Gary Larson, because he had a background in biology and science, and so his jokes have to do with science, and it's kind of like an inside joke. So here's someone who blew his cerebral cortex. The cerebrum is over 80% of your brain, and then the next largest piece of it is your cerebellum, which is kind of tucked in underneath or inferior to the cerebrum. When you consider that one part of the brain is 80% and the other part is less than 20%, it seems amazing that that smaller part has about half of the neurons. So you're like, well, what's going on with the rest of the brain up there, the thinking part of the brain, the cerebrum? Well, remember that it has a lot of neuroglial cells. It has the astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, ependymal cells. The cerebellum is a little bit similar to the cerebrum in that it has the outer cortex. The outer layer is the gray matter. So that's where your neurosoma are, where your cell bodies are. And then inside, it's got the white matter. It's got the axon bundles with the myelin wrapped around it. And it looks like a tree. So they call it the arbor vitae, or the tree of life. And then it has deep nuclei inside of it. So let me tell you a little bit about nuclei. Here's the slice through the cerebrum. And again, here's your gray matter on the outside and your white matter on the inside. But if you notice, here and there are clusters of nerve cell bodies, or neurosoma. So here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. And they have names, and they call them nuclei. So there's a subthalamic nucleus there, and then there's a nucleus in the thalamus. So you have a number of these throughout the cerebrum and then also in the cerebellum. Another amazing thing about the cerebellum is the cells, the neurons that are in there are huge, and they're very unusual in their branching. So they're called Purkinje cells, and that's a little confusing because when you learn about the heart, you learn about the Purkinje fibers that allow the electrical conductivity to go through the heart. So you will hear the word Purkinje again, but these are Purkinje cells. Here's a slice through the cerebellum, and they've color-coded it so you can see the different cell types. But there are your Purkinje cells with their amazing branches. Here's a picture of the tree of life right there. So there's your gray matter of the cerebellum, and then there you see the white matter looking like a tree. It seems like that when we study the brain, we almost always spend all of our time talking about the cerebrum, the thinking part of the brain, and they just say, and the cerebellum is used for balance, coordination. So here on this slide, it points out that recent studies, now that we're looking at it more closely, are finding all sorts of other things: emotional, linguistic, sensory, non-motor, comparing the textures of objects, perceiving space, recognizing objects from different views, keeping judge of elapsed time, and maintaining a tapping rhythm. So it's not just balance and coordination. There's a lot of other things that you do. You can judge the pitch of tones. You can distinguish between spoken words. But here's an interesting one. Many hyperactive children have small cerebellums. So if you think your kid's hyperactive, see if they'll do a brain scan and see if they have an abnormally small cerebellum. So as a teacher who's taught for close to 50 years, I can tell you that a lot of parents say, oh, my child's just hyperactive. And I want so very, very badly to tell them, no, your child's not hyperactive. You don't discipline your child. And so your child gets away with whatever they want to do. This goes into a lot more detail than we need to go into for a general anatomy physiology class. But I do want to point out a couple of interesting things about this part of the brain right here. So we've got the thalamus in there. And in neuroanatomy, you're going to learn about the different nuclei that are there in the thalamic region and the hypothalamus. But a lot of times people refer to this as your primitive brain. This is the one that regulates things that are basic, like thirst, eating, rage, sleep, emotions, your biological clock. It's also involved with sex, orgasm, sexual behavior. One of the first things that a lawyer defending someone of inappropriate sexual behavior should do is do a brain scan of the person and see if there's any lesions or tumors that could be causing abnormal sexual behavior. About 30 years ago, one of my students came bouncing up to me all excited and said, "Oh, Miss Drake, I am so excited. I spent most of the weekend reading the latest cookbook." And I thought, well, that's nice, dear. And then he looked at me and goes, "Oh my gosh, you don't know who Robin Cook is?" No, I don't. So if you have time after the semester is over, go check out some books by Robin Cook. They are amazing. He is a doctor and he has thrilling books, but he has so much information that he teaches you while you're reading the book. And one of them was someone who was murdered by having a shot of cocaine. It went through exactly what happens in your body when you have an overdose of cocaine. And the temperature goes up, so you're up to like 110 degrees, way above anything, 98.6, 100 that you should be. So that was so interesting. And the rush of excitement that he got right before he died, I mean, it's so interesting. So if you haven't discovered Robin Cook, I highly recommend his books. I was talking about this in one of my classes, and I always have a lot of kids who ride the EMT. They are in the ambulances, and they say, "Oh, okay, well that would explain why a lot of times when we pick up somebody who has a drug overdose, that their temperature doesn't even make any sense." Another thing that I like about the thalamus is it's the gateway to the cerebral cortex. So you have to go through the thalamus and then pass it on to the rest of the cerebrum. And it says not all information is passed along. The thalamus screens out most of the information it receives, so it doesn't send it on. It's involved in memory and in your emotions. So they talk about the limbic system. Again, take neuroanatomy if you have a chance, because it's really interesting. When you study the endocrine system, you're going to talk about the hypothalamus in great depth, because it is the puppet master that controls the pituitary. And the pituitary has a great number of the hormones that control your whole body. So it's one of the major control centers of the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system. So it's very, very important. It controls your body temperature. And a lot of times people think, oh my goodness, I have a temperature. I need to take something to bring my temperature down. Well, there's a reason that your hypothalamus tells you to run a fever. It's to wipe out something that's invaded your body. You've got an infection. You've got a virus in there. You have worms. You have something wrong. So if you elevate the temperature, perhaps you will kill it. But if you take something like aspirin or something to bring your temperature down, then it doesn't have a chance to kill the invading organism. Now, probably in school you learned about Native Americans and how they have sweat tents, where they'll go into a tent if they're sick and they'll have rocks that they heat up and then they pour water on them, and so they have not only steam but the heat in there. So they force their body to get warmer, hoping to drive out the infection. Your hypothalamus also regulates your hunger and tells you that you're not hungry anymore. But some of that also is under the control of your insulin and your glucagon. It also regulates your sleep, but usually when you talk about circadian rhythms, you don't talk about the hypothalamus, you talk about the pineal gland or pineal gland, and you talk about the hormone melatonin. You'll talk more about circadian rhythms when you get into the endocrine system, and again when you get into female reproduction, because you know about the menstrual cycles. So there's other cycles. You have estrogen cycles, testosterone cycles, progesterone cycles. If you want another thought-provoking movie to watch A Clockwork Orange. In it you have some depraved people. I mean, sick people. And it shows some of the things they do and the way they kill people. And it is horrific. I mean, it is beyond horrific. And then they finally catch the ringleader, and they do a scan, and they find out he's got a brain tumor. And so then they remove the brain tumor. And so now they're not aggressive. They're not sexually abusing people anymore. All of that is gone. So then the question is, well, they've been cured, so should you let them go? So it's a very thought-provoking movie. And you're just sitting there going, oh, I hope they catch him and I hope they kill him because he's just so evil. And then you find out it's a brain tumor. I put this brain slice in because I wanted to stop for just a second and remind you of some of the stuff that we've learned in lab and what we've learned in lecture. So we learned that there's two hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere of the brain. And we have this very deep fissure right here dividing the two, the longitudinal cerebral fissure. And then we talked about the corpus callosum, and it connects both halves of the brain. And sometime in severe epilepsy, they'll actually cut through this so that the epileptic seizure will stay confined in one or the other hemisphere, so that it doesn't spread, and so you have a whole brain seizure. Here's a picture of your thalamus. We've talked about the ventricles or the holes in your brain that allow the cerebrospinal fluid to circulate around, washing away waste and bringing in nutrients and other things that your brain needs. By having all these folds, you increase the surface area of the brain. So there's your geary and your sulci. We've talked about that. This is what the brain looks like if you strip away the blood vessels. But this is what it looks like. This is one of the reasons you have these folds in there, so that the blood vessels have a place to nestle down and drop off glucose and pick up waste. Rostral is towards the front. Caudal is towards your tail, or in this case, towards the spinal cord. Another movie, I'm always telling you movies, because when you watch movies, it really implants, fixes ideas in your mind. And one of them, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, starring Jack Nicholson, it is so interesting. The front part of your brain is the part that controls kind of like your behavior and your thinking. And when people were in mental institutions, they used to cut this part of the brain off. They did frontal lobotomies. They just literally removed that lobe. And then the patient was very docile. They could still eat, they could still feed themselves, go to the bathroom, all the things that you want a patient to be able to do that you don't want to have to do for them, but they don't give you any trouble. So you should watch that movie and you'll just get really mad. And also, if you've ever heard somebody talk about Nurse Ratched, now you'll see where that term came from. You're going to actually meet Nurse Ratched in that movie. So a lot of times if you're in the hospital and you have a nurse that's kind of a pain in the gluteus maximus, then you say, oh, great, I have a Nurse Ratched. So watch the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Here you go. The frontal lobe, aggression, motivation, foresight, planning, memory, mood, emotion. So take that out. Away goes your aggression. Away goes your planning to get into trouble. Your parietal lobe is your general senses, your taste, and a little of your visual information, but most of your visual information is in your occipital lobe. And one of the things I always tell my students, if you see someone, when they have a child that's misbehaving, they reach down with their hand and they slap the kid on the back of the head. And they say, I told you to quit doing that. What you do when you slap a child in the back of the head is you're hitting the occipital lobe, the part that processes the information coming in from the optic nerves. And then the brain actually flies forward and then comes back again in a kind of a whiplash. And so you can end up blinding a child by hitting them on the back of the head. So their eyes still work and they still bring in light and they still process the light and send it through the optic nerve. But the part of the brain that understands the light is destroyed. So it's just so easy. Instead of bending over and popping the kid on the rear end, they just slap him on the back of the head. And every time I see that, I just cringe in my soul. The temporal lobe is the area behind your temples. And this is where you have hearing, which makes sense because it's right there in front of your ears, and smell, learning, memory, and a little bit of your vision and your emotions in the temporal lobe. So here's a nice summary showing the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and then listing the various things that you do with each of the lobes. This slide puts in the insula, but you don't see it. If you see, they've got these little tongs and they're pulling down the temporal lobe and they're pulling up the frontal lobe so that you can see buried underneath it is the insula. And that's where you've got taste, pain, visceral sensation. So that's, my stomach hurts, that kind of thing. That's your viscera in there. Your consciousness, emotion, empathy, and keeping your heart beating correctly, homeostasis of your heart. When we were talking about the cerebellum, we said about half of the neurons, or the nerve cells, are there, and the other half are mostly in the cerebral area. You have glial cells and myelinated axons, which we call nerve fibers, that make up the majority of the cerebrum. And then again, when you guys take neuroanatomy, you'll talk about the tracts. The only tract that I really want you to know about is the corpus callosum. And it attaches the left and the right hemisphere. If you look at old fossilized skulls, like the Neanderthals and the Denisovians, you find that the cranial vault, the skull, the place where you would put the cerebrum, is smaller. So recently, in Homo sapiens, we have grown the cerebrum to be larger. So that's what they're talking about with recent evolutionary origin. So we have a much larger brain than the older skulls. Here are some of the skulls that they found. And look at the part where the cerebrum would be. So very much smaller. And then look at ours. Look at that cranial vault right there. Homo sapiens. Wise guy. Homo sapiens. In neuroanatomy, you'll learn about the little pyramidal cells and the large pyramidal cells and the cells that look like stars that connect them. So you'll learn about the cortex of the cerebellum, the cerebrum. You'll learn about the hippocampus, which is really involved with memory, and the amygdala, which has a lot of your emotions. So it's right there by the hippocampus. Your limbic system has the sensation of pleasure, reward. So that's your gratification or aversion, fear, sorrow. And sometimes people have problems with this. So we have medicines that can alter how you feel. You have your uppers, you have your downers to bring you up or down. And one of the things that they used to do, and I don't hear about it happening all that much anymore, but if you get into a really, really severe depression, for example, after you have a baby, it's not uncommon to have a hormonal crash and you have a really deep postpartum depression. And one of the things they used to do, if you didn't come out of it, because you need to come out of it, you need to love your baby, you need to feed your baby and take care of them. And if you're so depressed that you can't even do any of that, then what they would do is electroshock. So I don't know if they still do electroshock as much as they used to. A long time ago, I had a student who had to have electroshock treatment, and she was telling me about what the earlier electroshock they did was something of this nature. They put something in your mouth to keep you from biting your tongue because you start having seizures as they run the electricity to try to reset your brain. But she said they had realized you don't have to be awake for the procedure. So she said the later electroshock treatments that she had, they put her to sleep. And so she woke up and, didn't have the experience. She didn't have to experience the seizures. For those of you who are curious, here is the hippocampus, and there's the amygdala right there. And this is called your limbic system. I have several goals in teaching you. One of them, of course, is to get the information to you and illustrate it with stories and jokes and things that'll make it stick in your mind. Try to explain things, show you things that are important, but maybe you don't need for this particular course. Stuff like that. But then sometimes I want to step outside the book and I will look at what I call woo-woo science. So when you hear it, you go, woo woo, because it's pretty weird. So the Russians discovered something called Kirlian photography, and you can actually see the electrical energy coming out of people, and you can take a photograph of it. So I have a little video clip here of someone who's a yogi, and yogi is not the same word as yoga. Yoga is the stretching exercises and balance and all that stuff. But a yogi is someone who practices getting in touch with their inner being, with their inner nerves, brain, emotions, all of that. So a really experienced one can slow their heart rate to where you think they're dead. So they have a lot of things they can do. But one of the interesting things that I have is a video clip of Kirlian photography of a yogi pushing energy. Some people would call it chi. There you go. Let's try that again. So here's what it looks like normally, and this is what when you push the energy through. Normal, a lot of chi, a lot of energy coming out. The reason I brought that up is because another thing that they did with Kirlian photography is they had people who had mental problems, mental issues, and they did the Kirlian photography on them, and instead of having a coronal discharge or electrical field around their hands like that, their brain was not projecting a complete aura or coronal discharge. And so there would be gaps. So where you saw that yogi, he had what looked like sparks coming out from all of his fingers. But if you looked at the Kirlian photography handprint of someone who had schizophrenia or something of that nature, you'll find that their aura, the coronal discharge, does not go all the way around their hand. So that's considered to be woo-woo science because they don't understand the coronal discharge. They don't understand what's going on and causing that electrical field to come outside of someone's hands. So what they do feel more comfortable with is looking at brain waves. So we have electroencephalograms or EEGs where we look at the different brain waves. Other things that you can look at with an EEG besides mental illnesses, you can look for metabolic abnormalities, for brain tumors, someone who has degenerative brain disease, there's Alzheimer's, other forms of senility, and a lack of brain waves is a criterion for brain death. So sometimes the part of the body that tells you to breathe is still going, but you don't have any activity going on in your cerebrum. You're no longer thinking, having emotions, any of that stuff. That's all been destroyed. I remember my first EEG, and they came at me with all of these needle-looking things, and they taped them onto me as opposed to jabbing them into my skin, but I was terrified. So there's no telling what my EEG looked like. You have alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, and delta waves that they look at. So they're going to be different. They're going to be different if you're lying or if you're telling the truth. If you're engaged in concentrated mental activity, if you're thinking about something, versus you're awake, but you're not concentrating on any one thing. You're just kind of just chilling. This is a normal EEG, just chilling, not thinking about anything too much. Here's someone who's having a simple partial seizure, not a whole brain seizure. And here's a grand mal seizure. There's the electrical activity. It'd be interesting to look at the EEGs of older people, because we're always joking. It says, well, how do you get to sleep? And sit down in a comfortable chair and you're probably going to fall asleep. There are various drugs that will alter your EEG, your brain waves. One of them is barbiturates. They used to give barbiturates to kids who had seizures and anticonvulsants, and also for people who are anxious, had anxiety disorder. But there is psychological addiction, and there's a potential for overdose. So they replaced the barbiturates with benzodiazepines and other things to treat anxiety, insomnia, because you're not as likely to overdose and there's a lower risk of becoming addicted to it. And you see, I got this off of Wikipedia, so you know it's got to be right. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. Always check anything in Wikipedia, because anybody can post anything in Wikipedia, and they may or may not catch it if it's inaccurate information. I think this is interesting. If you ask somebody what sleep is, they know exactly what sleep is. It's what they do at night, how do you get ready for it, what is your routine for bed. But to actually have them define what is sleep, it would be hard to put it in words. So here you go. It's a temporary state of unconsciousness from which one can awaken when stimulated. Now, interestingly enough, some people have sleep paralysis. And we all do to an extent when we're asleep. Otherwise, we get up and we sleepwalk, or we act out what we're doing in our dreams. We start flailing. We start hitting people. If we're in a fight in our dream, you may end up hitting the person you're sleeping with, things like that. But you mostly have lowered muscle activity when you're asleep. So you may have restless leg syndrome and you kick your legs around and you roll over in the bed, but you usually are much calmer than that. But there are some people where the paralysis continues when they wake up and they can't move. And the students I've talked to that have had it before say it is so terrifying. Apparently it's fairly common. So I can only tell you where my students have talked to me about it, but I personally have never exhibited sleep paralysis once I woke up. So usually when I go to sleep, I wake up in the same position, so I don't roll around and toss very much. They break down sleep into 4 stages, and it's interesting because if you don't get sleep, then you'll die. And they're not really sure exactly why, but there's an inherited condition where you get an insomnia where you cannot sleep, and it kills you. So the first stage of sleep, 1 to 7 minutes long, you're drowsy, you close your eyes, you're relaxing, your muscles are kind of getting, letting go, you're losing your muscle tone. And if you're hooked up to an EEG, then you can see the alpha waves changing. But it's very easy to wake you up in the first stage of sleep. And then the second stage is where you're in actual light sleep. About a half hour after you've gone to bed and you're falling asleep, you're actually in moderate to deep sleep. Your vital signs fall, so your blood pressure drops, you're breathing more shallowly, your muscles are relaxed, and if you're hooked up to an EEG, then you can see the theta and the delta waves appearing. And then stage 4, you are so relaxed that it's very, very hard to awaken you. So it's usually the first 1/3 of the night. And I know when I go into that because I have a lot of dogs. And I'll go to sleep, the dogs aren't in the bed, and I'm sound asleep, and I wake up, and I'm surrounded with dogs. So somehow they got in, curled up next to me, and I didn't feel them, didn't notice them at all. When you're in REM sleep, you have rapid eye movements. So it's almost like you're reading a book or something. Your eyes are going back and forth, but hopefully your eyes are closed. And you have REM sleep about 5 times a night. You are harder to arouse when you're doing REM sleep than any other stage. And during this stage, you're having dreams. So if you're able to wake somebody up during REM sleep, usually you can ask them what they were dreaming about, and then they can tell you what it was that they were dreaming about. During this time, you have more of the sleep paralysis. So this keeps you from acting out your dreams, like I said. It would be interesting to know the evolutionary reason for this, but in REM sleep, the men have penile erection and ladies have clitoral erections, and you constrict your pupils. So this is a parasympathetic nerve activity. We'll talk more about sympathetic and parasympathetic in the next chapter. But basically, parasympathetic is the activities you carry out when you're just not doing anything in particular. But the sympathetic is when you are ready to either fight or run. They call it the fight or flight. So usually you're under the influence of something like adrenaline for the sympathetic. But parasympathetic is just normal. Nothing's frightening you. I used to fly all around the world and teach in various countries, and I lived in a number of different countries when I worked for the government. And one of the things that I thought was really odd is how your eyes and the light going into your eyes sets your rhythms, sets your pineal gland. And one of the things that they were trying out on airplanes was to shine a light under your legs. And they said that it would reset your circadian rhythms. And I was like, well, how does that work? Because your eyes are up here, and how do your legs sense light? So I always meant to follow up on that study and see, but I know that they've discontinued it, so I have a feeling it didn't work. I've been teaching anatomy physiology for almost 50 years now, and every now and then I learn some new stuff. And one of them that I found that I thought was interesting was the Orexins. They've discovered the hypothalamus makes this, there's a couple of hormones, and they're neuropeptides, so they're just a couple of amino acids stuck together that act in the synapses, and they keep you awake. And people who don't make enough have something called narcolepsy, and so they'll just be sitting there and they'll just fall asleep. And they bred some beagles, little dogs, that could simulate narcolepsy so they could study it. And it was so funny because you'd see these little puppies out running around, and all of a sudden they just fall over like they were dead, and they were sound asleep. And after a while they wake up and they get up and run around and play again, and all of a sudden, bloop, they fall over again. So obviously this would not be convenient if you're trying to hold a job, if you're trying to drive your car. So it's good that they found the hormone that keeps you awake. And here's what I was saying. Sleep deprivation is fatal. If you can't sleep, it will kill you. And they think that REM sleep is the time where you are building synapses, you're reinforcing synapses, and then you're getting rid of some with memories that you don't really need. And I threw this in because you do really need to know about synapses. So I'm going to show you this picture because this was really cool. This is a real picture, and they've taken it with a transmission electron microscope. So you can see the presynaptic membrane. So that would be the end of the axon. That would be the bouton. And you can actually see the little bags of neurotransmitter right there. And they're coming down here, and they're fusing with the cell membrane, the axiolemma. And right there is the synapse. So you don't want the nerve ending to touch the muscle. You don't want those two things to touch, or whatever the other cell is, the postsynaptic membrane. They mustn't touch. So there's the gap, and that's the synapse right in through there. So along this membrane of the postsynaptic membrane, you've got some sort of a receptor. And so as the depolarization, as the electricity runs down, it's going to cause these vesicles to fuse. They're going to release the neurotransmitter across the synapse, and it's going to bind to the receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. So I've mentioned it before, and here I've mentioned it again because it's super important. You're going to see that again, guaranteed. So here's a summary of sleep, where you're awake, and here you are getting drowsy, and your eyes are getting heavy, and now you're actually going into sleep here, and you're going into deeper sleep, and now you're in the deep, deep sleep, and now you're in REM sleep. And here you are going through that same cycle about 5 times in the course of a night. And notice that your REM sleep gets longer and longer the further you're asleep, the longer you're asleep. So most people need about 8 hours of sleep. But there are stories of people like, I think Thomas Edison, he only needed 3 hours of sleep a night. So people say that's why he was so creative and inventive, and because he had more time to think about stuff. You've probably used the word recognize, like I recognize that word, or I recognize that person. So cognition is a set of mental processes where you get information and you use the information. So that's one of the things that teachers always say. I don't want you just to memorize this stuff. I want you to be able to use it. I want you to be able to apply it. When you see a patient in your own life, if you get some test results back, what do they mean? No, so don't just memorize stuff. That's not what this course is about. There is a lot of memorization in it, but you need to know how to use the knowledge. So reasoning, judgment, memory, imagination, intuition, all of these things are cognition. So most of the stuff in your brain is all about cognition and associating things. And we learn about cognition and where it occurs in the brain by using PET scans. Remember, where you inject radioactive glucose and you see which part of the brain lights up when you're doing something or thinking about something or feeling some emotion. And then the functional MRI, and I still strongly urge you to watch that 60 minutes video about fMRI, because it is uncanny, all the things that you can do. Learning is acquiring new information. Memory is being able to pull up the information that you've stored, that you've learned. So it's storage and retrieval of information. And then forgetting is letting go of information that you really don't need. Now, that's one of the things that so many students say, well, I don't need algebra. I'm never going to need algebra. I never use it in my life. And so they consider it trivial information, and so they forget it. But if you have a strong motivation to memorize something, usually to put something in your memory, you're going to have more than one sensory input. So you're going to have a desire to learn it. You need to see it. You need to hear it. You need to do something with the information. Maybe take someone's blood pressure. When you do that, then all of a sudden all the information about systolic and diastolic starts making sense to you because you're actually doing something with the information. So if you have multiple ways of bringing the information in, it's more likely to make a memory and stay with you than if you just sit down and just read over flashcards, for example. A lot of kids make flashcards and they just go over them and over them and over them and over them. And for some people that works, but for most people it doesn't. As soon as you lay the flashcards down and then somebody asks you a question off one of the flashcards, you don't have it. All right, and then amnesia. There are a couple kinds of amnesia. One of them is where you can't recall things that happened before you had the injury or whatever caused you to have amnesia. So that's retrograde. It goes into the past. And anterograde amnesia is you're unable to store new information. So usually whenever they talk about someone has amnesia, they're talking about retrograde. And it's not at all uncommon for somebody who's had a car accident or some traumatic event to not be able to remember the time from the time the injury happened until the time you're asking them. So you say, well, do you remember which car hit you? Or do you remember who else was in the car with you? And they've lost all that information. For memory, we usually talk about the hippocampus. If you're talking about learning motor skills, like you want to be the best hoop shooter in basketball, then you will store that information in your cerebellum, and your amygdala is your emotional memory. I want to take a second to talk about Dr. Spock. And most people, when I say that, they think I'm talking about Star Trek and Dr. Spock and Captain Kirk. But there was a Benjamin Spock who wrote a book that every parent got 1 or 2 copies every time they got pregnant. And his thing was never, ever give a kid negative feedback, ever. It'll destroy their self-confidence. If you tell a kid that they're stupid, then they'll think they're stupid. If you tell them they can't do something, then they'll believe you and think that they can't do it. And all that made so much sense. And so all the parents were like, right, yes, okay, I see where that, don't be negative. And so it spilled over into school. And so teachers are told, well, if you give a kid a bad grade, it's going to make the kid feel bad. And we don't want the kids feeling bad because then they'll want to drop out of school and they'll give up and they won't want to learn. So you should give all the kids good grades. And so they started giving the kids all good grades so that they would feel good. And they stopped flunking children because, goodness, how bad would that make you feel that they said you're not smart enough, you don't know enough to go on to the next grade. We don't want to hurt their feelings. And so the kids, not being idiots, they're like, okay, so let me get this right. I can work my fingers to the bone and I can study really, really, really hard and turn in a really great paper and I'm going to get a good grade. Or I can turn in a piece of crap. And because the teacher can't tell me it's a piece of crap, I don't have to do any work. And so the kids stopped working. Because if you're going to get the same grade, whether you work really hard or if you just turn in a little bit of nothing. And so later on they were talking to Dr. Spock and he said, I didn't think that one through. Or words to that effect. A French physician named Paul Broca found this area in the frontal region that controls speech. So this is called the Broca area right there. There's another area called Wernicke's area, and it is involved with speech. So you've got the Broca's area and Wernicke's area together that allow you to have language. So here's that area, Wernicke's area. And they have all these other areas that they've mapped out. Again, take neuroanatomy and find out more about the brain because it's absolutely fascinating. I want to finish off this chapter again with one of my cartoons from one of my favorite people, Gary Larson. And I told you that you don't feel pain in your brain, so they keep you awake when they do brain surgery. And the other thing is they can stimulate parts of the brain and cause you to remember a smell of apple pie or make you kick your leg. So in this one, it shows some doctors playing with somebody that they're doing brain surgery on. And they say, whoa, that's a good one. Try this, Hobbs. Just poke his brain right there where my finger is. Look what it makes him do. And because we can do brain mapping, someone got the idea of putting a person, homunculus, on this. So this part of the brain, deep down in the fissure, right there, is where the area is that controls your genitalia. And here's your toes, your leg, your hip, your thigh, the trunk of your body, your shoulders. And look how much is dedicated to your fingers as compared to your arm or your whole visceral area. And look at your face, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, even your gums and your teeth. So they've been able to map these sulci and the gyri along here and tell you if you touch this part, you'll feel it in your thumb. If you touch this part, it could cause your leg to kick. Here's one I like this one even better. This is one that I found.